My name is Kevin Winnery. I am a developer evangelist for Twilio. Twilio is an API company based out of San Francisco, but I live here in St. Paul and work remote for the folks out there. So Twilio, for those of you who don't know anything about it, is an API that makes it really easy for developers to send and receive text messages, to make and receive phone calls, and also to embed voice over IP functionality into web and native mobile applications. So today what I'd like to do, and I won't waste your time with slides or stuff of that nature, but what I'd like to show you is just at a high level kind of how Twilio works by doing just a simple demonstration of the API. And then from there, we'll move into something that's a little bit more interesting. I built a little web application that emulates a lot of the features of Google Voice. I know for me, like when Google Voice came out, like I thought it was really cool. Like I can send text messages from the browser. I can buy a phone number and do some routing with it and stuff like that. But if you're a web developer, you already have the skills you need to build that same type of application today. It's actually really easy. So I'm going to show you how to do it. The front end, and I'll point out some of the front end stuff that I used and the back end stuff. In this situation, I used Rails on the back end, but it will work with any back end that you have set up. In fact, my Rails application, if there are any Rails developers in here, you'll probably cringe because it's not very RESTful at all. It's mostly like an RPC type of thing. And on the front end, I ended up using Knockout.js. I've been working with Backbone a lot lately, but I wanted to try out Knockout because I wasn't really satisfied with what I was getting out of Backbone. It seemed like I needed to add quite a bit into it. So I wanted to give Knockout a try and ended up actually liking Knockout less, but I'll show you what it does here in the demo. So without further ado, let's just really quickly kind of show you how Twilio works. If you use the Twitter, feel free to hit me up there and heckle me in real time using your mobile devices. Oh, also, yeah, please do take out your mobile device. I need for all of you, if you have a mobile phone, take that out of your pocket, have that ready to send a text message. I'm actually going to need your help for this demo. So if you could do that for me, that would be great. So one way to think about Twilio is it's a API platform that gives your app a phone number. So a phone number that you can program, you can accept incoming calls, you can send outbound text messages. Much like a web application has a URL, Twilio gives your application a phone number that anyone on the global telecom network can work with. So to start things off, let's actually go ahead and buy a phone number. So let's search for a number here in the 612 area code, see if there are any available. I see that there is. I can purchase one of those and use that number for $1 a month through Twilio. All right, so that's awesome. That is my phone number, the URL, if you like, for my application out on the telecom network. And after I buy a phone number, I can configure a couple of properties about it. Twilio uses a pattern called webhooks, which essentially is where a developer will specify URLs that will be requested over HTTP when certain interesting events happen in Twilio. So in this case, Twilio will send an HTTP request to your application when it receives an inbound text message or an inbound phone call. So here for the SMS URL, I'm going to set this up to a server that I control, demo.kevinwinnery.com. We'll call that sms.php. So Twilio is going to send a post request to that server whenever this phone number has been dialed. I'm just going to grab that. So let's head out to my server. I might have actually done this demo before, so I'm going to rm sms.php to make sure that there's nothing up my sleeve. And let's recreate that. All right, so when Twilio sends a request to my server, it needs a response back. And what I respond back with is an XML document called TWIML. So let's create one of those now. The first thing that we're going to do is create a content type header to let Twilio know that I'm going to be sending some XML back its way. So we'll set the content type header. Great. And when Twilio sends me a request, I reply with a response. And in this case, I'm going to tell it to send an SMS back to anybody who sends me one that says, "Hey, MinneBar, thanks for hanging out." Something along those lines. And now this is where I'm going to need your help. So please take out your mobile telephones. And if you could just quickly send a SMS text message to this number, which is 612, I'm going to do it on my phone as well, 294-7441. Whoops. I put that in the message field. That's not what I wanted. 612 294 7441. And I'll just send that. All right, I hear some whoops out there in the audience. So are some people getting some text messages back? Give me a quick nod, a heck yeah, if you are. Okay, excellent, very, very good. So it'll kind of come out one at a time. By default, Twilio will only allow you to send one outbound message every second. You can work with Twilio to up that number, or you can send through a shortcode to send out more messages per second. By default, it's about 1 per second. So all right, that's pretty awesome. When Twilio gets a text to this number, it's going to make an HTTP request to your server, and then your server will tell Twilio how you'd like to respond to that message using TWIML. So that's how we handle inbound communication. But how do we do outbound communication? Let's open up and go back out to my terminal, and I'm going to write another little application, mate app.js. And this time I'm going to write some code in JavaScript, which is going to use the Twilio REST API to actually send some outbound communication and grab some information from the Twilio server. So this example is going to be written in Node.js. That's actually the library for Twilio that I maintain. But there's helper libraries for Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, and lots of other languages out there on our website. So let's create a new Twilio client, which is going to be able to make HTTP requests against our server. By default, when you create a new client, if you don't pass any arguments, I'm going to look for environment variables that have your Twilio account SID and auth token configured, which is essentially the username and password for your account. So, whoops, nope, that's fine. So let's use the client to list all the SMS text messages that were sent to that number that I had you guys text. So if you sent anything naughty, you are going to be revealed at this point in the presentation. So for all those text messages, let's start by, we'll say, data.sms messages. And for each of those bad guys, we are going to just write that out to the console. Console.log message.body. Awesome. So let's run that with Node.js and see who was sending stuff in. So we got some, hey Kohax, how's it going, dude? Wherever you are. Hey, what's up? So yeah, please do not reply to this message. Oh, sorry. All right. Off to a rough start. Jeez. Okay. All right. So so that's how we grab messages from, or grab data about our account from the Twilio backend. Now let's actually do something kind of interesting. Let's actually, if you want to turn on your ringers, this works way better if you turn on your ringers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a call. So I'll say client.makeCall, and I'm going to make a call to you guys. So we'll say message.from, and it's going to be from my Twilio number. And what's going to happen during the call is specified by this URL, which is going to generate some TWIML, which tells Twilio how to handle that outbound connection. So let's go to demo.kevinweir.com /voice.php. Whoops. Awesome. And that's going to dictate how this phone call is handled. So I actually don't have voice.php yet, or I shouldn't. Again, I'm going to remove that if it already exists. And we'll create voice.php. And once again, we are going to start by setting our content type header to indicate that we are returning XML. And this time in our response, we are just going to go ahead and play an MP3 file, which is out on my server, demo.kevinweir.com/audio/ indigo.mp3. So a little MP3 file, which is sitting out on my server. Now, if we run our little node script out here, rather than just printing that out to the console, we should start seeing some phone calls coming out here. All right, I hear the sound of success out there in the audience. Very nice. So yeah, hopefully it'll come through to mine here pretty soon. But again, there are a few people out here, so it might take a minute. Yes.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
I have a question. So for each one of these calls it's placing to us, is it going back to your web server and drawing that file, that MQG file each time, or does it cache it?
It's going to, when Twilio goes out to hit your server, it is going to make a fresh HTTP request every time. Unless you set the cache headers on your response, then Twilio will cache your reply. So you can manually set cache headers if you would like, and Twilio will respect those. Yeah, I don't want you to hit the server 10,000 times. So yeah, Twilio will respect your cache headers. Yep, no problem. So at a high level, that's kind of how Twilio works. So you buy a phone number. You can handle inbound communication by, whenever anybody sends something to your phone number, Twilio will hit your server and let you know about it, and you can tell Twilio how to handle the incoming request. Or you can make outbound communication, so you can make calls, send text messages, and there's obviously lots of really cool stuff you can do with that. You can automate business processes by sending out text message notifications to let people know that their widget is ready, or you can accept text messages and sort of create an entire interface where people can just interact with your service completely through SMS. And it's all really easy, so you saw just a few lines of code. You can create these types of applications yourself. So that's kind of neat for sort of a simple demo, but what I thought I would like to show you is this little application that I'm in the process of building called HackerPhone. It's basically an implementation of Google Voice, which does a lot of the core features. A lot of it isn't done yet. It's going to be up on my GitHub repository. It's github.com/kwinnery if you want to check it out. Basically, it allows me from my browser to send a call or a text message to somebody that I choose. It also will allow me to display text messages that have been sent to my number. So I have a Twilio number configured here. If I go down to the text menu, let's set up a new number. So there's that one that I just got. Let's use that number. It is Ajax. It's not completely perfect as yet. So, these are just all the messages that were sent from my account. So, hey, MinneBar, this is thanks for hanging out. I should probably switch that up. I bet I could pretty easily. Let's do some live coding right now just for fun. Go to my Twilio controller, get text, and we'll say to that number rather than from. Let's head back out here, and what? So, okay. Does this call me twice? All right, so clearly my UI did take some, it's going to take some massaging. So let's actually choose a different number so we're not like displaying all of your phone numbers up on the screen for any extended period of time. Or we'll just hit refresh there. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's choose a Twilio number that we're going to use here. We'll just use that number just for fun. And I can send a text message from that number. I'll send it to my phone, just so I don't have to bother any of you for more audience participation. You've already humored me more than enough. Hey there, this is a test. Hit send. And then here in a few seconds, hopefully you should hear the little whoop come to my phone. Hey there, this is a test. I guess you didn't hear it that time, but got a text message through to my phone. Happy to work with you guys as well. So, and also directly in my browser, and this is kind of the coolest feature of this application, I can actually make an outbound call to a phone out in the audience. For this, actually, let's grab some audience participation. Who would like to help me out here with giving me their phone number? All right, sir, what is your mobile phone number?
Actually, I didn't get a phone call last time, so somebody else should do it. I just ported my number. I got it.
Okay, so anyone want to hook me up with a mobile number? Yes. 952. Yeah, 952. 649. 9925. All right, so I'm going to click call, and then Twilio uses a new HTML5 standard called WebRTC, which uses built-in APIs in the browser.
Do you have to use numbers for that, or if there's like text associated with it, does it convert the text to the number, or do you have to do that ahead of time?
In what sense? So, all right, so
if your telephone number spells something.
Looks like I can talk to you right now. Okay, awesome, very cool.
1-800-Flowers.
100 flowers, we can, yeah, I should try that. I should try that for next time.
Will it convert the flowers into the correct
You
number?
can hang up right now.
How do you hang up that phone that you're at?
Oh, this is how the API works. I say Twilio in the console, I say Twilio.device.disconnect all. Ba-bam! And that's how it works. So don't so much have that in the UI as yet. But there is a JavaScript API that handles that. I'm sorry, I was only, you start over with your question. I'm sorry.
You punched in a number there. Could you put in like 1-800 flowers and it will do intelligent with the word flowers by converting it to the numeric numbers that are represented? Or do you only accept the plus, the 1, and then the numeric digit?
Twilio will try to massage phone numbers if it has like hyphens and dashes and stuff like that, it'll work with that. If you omit the country code, it'll assume it's a US number, but it doesn't, I don't think it transposes like for the letters and stuff like that would be. Yeah, it doesn't do that. At least on the back end, it doesn't do that. You'd have to do that on your front end. All right, so that's how we work within, we send an outbound call, but also here in my browser, here, let's do this with this number. And I'm going to pick on you again, sir, to help me out. kevinweir.com/ let's do, what did I call that? 1 second. I'm going to go out to my server and just double check. I have a little script out there that will call my client, so it's called MinneBar incoming. That's it. Okay. So if you would do me a favor, oops. And if somebody, just one somebody, if it's more than one somebody, this demo is going to break. If somebody could call that number, that would be awesome if you want to help us out. So, all right, we have an inbound call coming right now. All right, so inbound. Okay, so here in my browser, application error has occurred. I heard the computer lady just told me that I screwed something up. Okay, this is the part of the demo where I demonstrate how you debug things when they break in Twilio. So the Twilio admin console, yes, question?
Is that Twilio's version of like a 500 error?
Yeah, there's a computer lady who says, I'm sorry, an application error has confirmed, or it has occurred. So I can go to logs, notification. Let's see. So 502. Let's see. So anyway, if you go to the notification screen here, you can see if there are any errors either requesting TWIML from your server or on Twilio's end. They'll show up here. In this case, Twilio tried to send a post request to MinneBar incoming.php, which is the script that I just configured. So there was a 502 that happened on my server. Content type doesn't match. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, you know what? I bet I didn't save the changes. Oh, yes, I did. Never mind. Oh, wait, my server doesn't support HTTPS. There we go. If you want to hit redial for me, I'm sure it'll work this time. All right, so. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm getting an incoming call in my browser, and I'm going to hit allow. And I'm going to say hello. Hello? Can you hear me over there?
Hello? Yes, yeah.
All right. There we go. Very awesome. So with a few lines of JavaScript on your client side, you can essentially implement a soft phone. Some applications of this that we've seen are like Zendesk, the help desk software provider, allows support agents to call customers directly from the browser or receive incoming support calls directly in the browser while they're looking at their user information. There's been lots of really great applications of this. Hulu for their IVR system, they've built that whole system out on Twilio, and they have browser-based components of that as well. All right, so that's kind of the demo. Let's dig in a little bit to the code and show you how this works. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but the technology stack is Ruby on Rails on the back end. I'm using JavaScript and Knockout.js for sort of the rich client. And then I'm obviously using the Twilio Ruby library to do all the telephony awesomeness that we just saw. So I'll start with the Rails application just to give you a sense of what needs to happen to make that work. So here's my Rails application. If you want to use the Twilio Ruby gem, you'll probably declare that here in your gem file. So in a Ruby on Rails application, you manage dependencies through a gem file. So you'll include Twilio Ruby right there. And here I have again, a not RESTful controller set up for that Twilio functionality that you saw. I just created controller methods for all of those various backend services that are just going to be returning JSON to the client. So here I create a class level variable, which is going to be a Twilio client instance. And this is going to be authenticated, like essentially my way to create authenticated requests against the Twilio backend. And to initialize that, I'm going to grab an environment variable, which has my Twilio account SID and my Twilio auth token, which is the best way to access that information. You don't want to necessarily hard code that into source files, or else you might accidentally check that into version control and expose your credentials or something along those lines. So out here in the UI, when I go to set up a new number, that's going to go hit my server and grab all of my Twilio numbers that I can choose to use with this application to make outbound calls and to send text messages and things like that. So to grab that information, I'm going to use the client to grab the list of incoming phone numbers for the master account, and for each of those phone numbers, I'm going to push that into an array, and then I'm going to render all those phone numbers as JSON back to the client. And all these services are being hit via AJAX. Like, these are not, JSON is the only thing these will ever return. I can also send a text message. So when the UI sends an SMS, again, I'm going to create an SMS text message that uses the to, the from, and the body post parameters that it receives from the server. And then I'm going to render back a response to the client. And then here I can grab a list of SMS text messages. All of the list functions on the client object take a hash of parameters that can be used to filter the search. By default, 50 records are returned whenever you grab data from the Twilio backend. So I'm going to grab a list of text messages that were sent to a given number, and then for each of those, I'm going to push those into an array, render that back as JSON. Now here's where it actually gets interesting a little bit. So the Twilio client SDK is essentially the piece of Twilio that allows you to do voice over IP communication in the browser. So that basically means like browsers and iPhone applications and Android applications are able to spend your Twilio credits to make outbound calls and receive inbound calls and things like that. So obviously you don't want to let any client use your credentials to make these calls. So what you do as an application developer is, for every client that you want to use voice over IP functionality through Twilio, you generate a one-time use capability token, which indicates what permissions that particular client has. So for this browser, that browser can make outbound calls, and that browser can accept inbound calls, and then you can optionally set that token to expire after 5 minutes or whatever makes sense for your application. So on the server side, you're going to generate one of these capability tokens. Most of the time, you're going to use a Twilio helper library to do that. So I create like a Twilio capability token generator with, again, using my account SID and auth token. And the first thing I'm going to do is allow my client to make outgoing calls. And the argument to this function is this big nasty string. And I won't have time to kind of dive into all of this, but this string is a unique identifier for what's called a TWIML application. So if I go back out to my admin console, a TWIML application is basically a set of webhook URLs that you can share across multiple phone numbers in your application. So one use for this is, you saw before when I bought a phone number, I could type in a URL that Twilio would hit via HTTP whenever it got an inbound request. Now, if I had 10, 20, or 100 phone numbers, I don't want to copy, cut, paste that same URL in for all those numbers. So what I can do is configure one of these TWIML applications to have all of my endpoints configured in one place, and then I can use the same application across any numbers that I control. But the other thing that you use TWIML applications for is with Twilio Client, you can specify a voice URL that's going to serve up some TWIML that essentially tells Twilio what to do with an outbound call coming from your voice over IP client. So that's this configuration step here. And then also to accept incoming calls, you're going to essentially give this client a unique string identifier of some kind. So if you had an authenticated web application, it might be their username or their generated unique ID, something that uniquely identifies that client, and it's going to basically act as their phone number. And then if you ever want to call this person's browser or the iPhone application, you can do that with TWIML. And so let me do the outbound call. So we'll do MinneBar latency, MinneBar outgoing.php. All right. So in this case, this is the TWIML that's going to be served back to Twilio whenever my browser makes an outbound call. So when I want to make an outbound call, I'm basically going to look in the post parameters that were sent to this PHP script for the number that I want to call, and then I'm going to dial that number. Also, when I make outbound calls, I have to specify a caller ID, and that's the ID that's going to show up on the person that or on the phone of the person that I'm calling. So where these post parameters come from, and I'm jumping around a little bit, so I apologize for that. But if I go out here to app view model, yeah, you have to verify a number to be used as a caller ID. So it does not have to be a Twilio number, no. It could be any caller ID that you can verify. So, and this is the little piece of JavaScript that I call in the browser to actually connect that outbound call. So this JavaScript object literal contains the post parameters that Twilio is going to send to my TWIML generating script when it tries to make an outbound call. So in this case, I want to post the number that I want to make a call to, and then again, out in my little PHP application sitting on my server, I'm going to look for that post parameter and then generate TWIML that'll tell Twilio to connect a call from my VoIP client in the browser to this particular number. All right, so that's kind of what's going on the server side. Again, this is not good RESTful API design whatsoever. This is just glorified RPC. So I'm sure you guys could craft a much nicer backend API than this one. But this kind of shows you how on the Ruby side you would use the Twilio APIs to power this type of application. Now, if we head out to the client side, as I said, for the rich client piece of this application, I wanted to give Knockout.js a try. And in the early going, I really like Knockout, actually. Like the data binding stuff that it has is really well designed if you're not using multiple view models. So the way in which you can kind of transfer data from a JavaScript object and then automatically update the UI is actually really nice. So so I'll kind of show you one example of that. So where is that thing? Okay. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so this little paragraph tag right here, this contains the currently selected Twilio number in the UI. So if we go out there, I can just sort of remind you where that is. So whichever Twilio number I select to use is being rendered to the UI right there. And then if I go to this set up a new number UI and scroll around my available options, I can click on one of those, and then my number automatically updates. And that data binding is the value proposition of Knockout. And the way that works is I can use in my HTML a data bind attribute to specify that I want to bind the text of this particular HTML element to this current number property, which exists on something that Knockout calls a view model. So the view model in this case is in this file appViewModel.js. And here I just declare a JavaScript object. That's all it is. It's just a JavaScript object. And then that object has properties such as the current tab, which by default is the voicemail tab. And then it also has the current number somewhere. Now the current number property of my view model is being set to a Knockout observable. And basically an observable in Knockout is a value that whenever its value is set, you can essentially propagate that change anywhere in the UI where this view models or that data is actually bound. And where I actually go through and do the binding is in my document ready event. Again, I'm using jQuery on document ready handler there. And then I'm going to apply those view model bindings to my entire HTML document. Alternately, I can apply it to just like a subset of the document. So I can say document get element by ID. Whoops. And I can specify another DOM node somewhere in my document, and then those bindings will only apply within the context of that node. But in this case, for the app view model, I'm going to want to bind it to the entire document. Now, this is where my major beef with Knockout came in as I was building this application. The way that I sort of, if you've used any MVVM frameworks, do we have any WPF developers in the house or Flex developers, anything like that? So a couple, two, sort of, not really, okay. So if you've used like a MVVM framework, like for rich client development, you're used to having, multiple views, each that sort of maintain their own state, and when you update that state, those changes are automatically updated in the UI. So what I thought I would do is I'd have these individual fragments of the DOM, each with their own view model, and I'd be able to have a nice component-oriented application that way. But it turns out that Knockout really doesn't like for you to have nested view models in your application, and the data binding stuff really starts to fall down unless you have like sort of absolute in-memory pointers to these view models. So anyway, I'm probably dragging you into the woods or into the reeds a little bit there, but that's one of the things I ran into is I had problems nesting views for Knockout, which is probably why I wouldn't use it in the future. Yeah, question? I did. I actually started this demo in Backbone, and I was just like, this really sucks. Because, I mean, Backbone's okay, but I had to add in a templating library. I had to add in, this ORM. I had to, I used some generators to create the view models. I had to massage the back end so that I could use the Backbone sync functionality. And I ended up I wrote so much custom code, I just didn't understand like what value I was getting from Backbone. I know a lot of people like it, and maybe if I used it and learned it better, I would like it too. So I don't know. It's been kind of a disappointing thing for me. I think I'm going to rewrite this yet again in Ember.js and see if I like that any better. So we'll see. Yeah. So the only other JavaScript stuff I'll do, because I don't have a ton of time and I want to save some time for questions and for people to come up afterwards. So the interesting JavaScript stuff that I want to show you is not so much Knockout, but how we integrate that VoIP functionality that we saw in the browser. So when the page loads, I'm going to make an AJAX request to my server to get my capability token that I'll need to essentially configure my Twilio client VoIP SDK here in the browser. So in my success callback, I'm going to grab this server-generated token and then call Twilio Device.setup. So Twilio.device, and I just, again, where that comes from is I just included the Twilio library from a CDN that we provide. So you can just include that JavaScript library in your page. And Twilio.device, this essentially functions as like the phone that your application has in the browser. And then I set it up with my capability token, and then it's ready to go to receive incoming calls and make outbound calls. And to accept inbound calls, it's pretty simplistic right now, but I can specify a callback handler function to be called every time my client has an inbound connection pending. And then I can handle that question or I can handle that connection like connection.accept. Probably I'd want to like prompt the user in the UI saying like, do you want to accept this incoming call? But in this case, I just automatically accept it. It's worth noting that after this connection.accept function is called, that's when the browser's native functionality takes over. So in Chrome, you might remember that in the browser, I was prompted to allow the web application to have access to my device microphone. So that actually happened, that native authentication happens after I call accept on the connection. WebRTC and that whole experience that you just saw is right now only available in Chrome. But all the way back to IE6, we fall back to the Flash player to do the binary data communication. Yes.
Does Twilio provide a service where I can do watches? So somebody calls me and then all of the on my server that know what touchtones are.
Yeah, I mean your interaction with touch tones happens through like you can specify TWIML that essentially accepts input from the user, and you don't have to like know anything about how to handle DTMF tones. Kind of how it looks, if I can go out here. If you want to gather input from the user, I'm going to break my demo here, but this gather tag basically says that if you're handling a call, you use the gather tag, and then here you can say dial 1 for support or hang up or something, whatever your menu options are, and then Twilio will gather DTMF tones, and then by default it'll request the same URL again, and you'll kind of enter a loop that way so you can implement your call tree. The other thing that you can do is you can specify an action here, and once the user enters some digits, Twilio will make a post request to this URL that'll contain a post parameter called digits, and that'll have the input from the user that they punched into their phone. If you want something that's just totally off the shelf, you could check out OpenVBX, which is a VBX phone system that you can just throw on a server, and it handles a lot of common use cases around that. Yeah. Question.
So in the same picture, is that text-to-speech capability there?
Yes.
Is there any speech-to-text, say if you want to do like voice recognition?
Yeah. Yep, we use a third-party transcription service, and it's not immediate. There is some server processing that needs to happen, but you can specify like a call. You can record a call, and then there's a flag you can set in TWIML that says record this call, and then Twilio will do the transcription, make a recording, and then you can grab an MP3. You can grab an MP3 file off of that, and then you can also grab like just the plain text for that phone call as well. Yes. So yeah, that's a lot of what I wanted to show. So this is how I accept those incoming calls, and then the other thing I wanted to show is how I make outbound calls. I guess I already showed this already, but I call twilio.device.connect, and then to that, I pass in any parameters that I want to be posted to my TWIML generating service on the back end. In this case, I wanted to use the value of that text field to call that number, which was input in the UI. So that's kind of the most interesting stuff that I wanted to show in the UI. I have about 10 minutes left, but I wanted to save lots of time for questions, and if people want to come up afterwards and talk to me, ask questions, that'd be great. Also, I have lots of cards, so if you have any questions going forward, I'm based here in St. Paul, so I'm happy to jump on the phone, we can hang out. If you're hacking something, I go to a co-working place called Jewel in downtown Minneapolis, so I'm around a lot, so I'm happy to work on some stuff with you. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll take any questions that you got right now as well. Yeah. So here's no questions? Oh, am I out of time? Then I planned it this way, so it would be over exactly at the same time. So, all right, awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.